Hi, it's Kerry here again today, and I just want to talk about one of the authors I discovered last year, 2020. That is the author Daniel Mendelsohn. Now, Mendelssohn's a bit of a Renaissance guy. He's a writer, obviously. He's a critic, he's an editor, and he also finds time to be a humanities professor at Bard's College. Now, I discovered Mendelssohn's work when I was listening to the Virtual Memories podcast hosted by Gil Roth. He mentioned the book An Odyssey was one of his top books of 2019. So I got hold of it a few weeks later, and I have to say that it was one of my top books as well. I really enjoyed this book. It's intellectually stimulating, so, well, there's a lot going on in this book. It's ostensibly the tale of when he let his 80-year-old father, Jay, sit in on his class teaching the epic poem of the Odyssey by Homer to a group of young people. Now, we delve into lots of father-son dynamics, the history of their fractured relationship, and what made his father the man he is. And at the same time, we go through a potted version of the Odyssey, its high points, main features, and its special ring composition. Now that becomes important to Mendelssohn's work. So the Odyssey, An Odyssey, is subtitled A Father, a Son, and an Epic, and it really does cover all those things. I enjoyed it immensely, and it led me on to reading Mendelssohn's magnum opus, perhaps. That's The Lost. Now, that's a completely different story than An Odyssey. It's sort of autobiographical, sort of a mystery, sort of a detective story. Basically, Mendelssohn, as a child, heard lots of conflicting and confusing stories about members of his family who were killed by the Nazis in the 1940s. As an adult, he decided to investigate this a bit more. He travels to the Eastern European town that his family originated from. The town itself has changed hands between about 3 different nations, depending on the upheavals of the 20th century. He travels around the world, from Australia to Israel to South America, interviewing the survivors of the village, the people who had encountered the horrors of the Nazi occupation, interviews them, uncovers lots of mysteries and secrets from that time, and tries to piece together what actually happened. Now, it's quite a deep and meaningful book. He intersperses the chapters of his investigation with his commentary on stories from the Hebrew Bible and how that kind of, the themes match up with what he is uncovering. I like to say it had a happy ending, but it left me quite stunned. There's a lot of brutality, especially the Nazi atrocities, like I said. And Mendelssohn himself was deeply affected by the book. So the third book that I read from him, Three Rings, starts out after he wrote The Lost. He's quite battered and bruised mentally. One of his editors suggests that he writes something that he knows, something closer to home. So that becomes the genesis of An Odyssey. Now, he writes a draft of An Odyssey. His editor says it's not quite there, so he decides to use the ancient Greek ring composition technique to bring it to life. And that's how it became the Odyssey, which goes forward, loops back, and brings in all sorts of digressions to illuminate the story a bit more. Now, Three Rings kind of links these two books, tells a little bit more autobiographical notes about Mendelssohn himself and his life, and at the same time that mentions the stories of 3 writers in exile. So we have Erich Auerbach in the 1930s running away from the Nazis and running to Turkey, where he wrote his master work. There's also Francois Fenelon in the 1600s, who ended up writing one of the best-selling books in Europe. And we skip forward to the post-war years with W.G. Sebald, who wrote a lot of books which go into the great digressions, much like Mendelssohn has tried to do. Three Rings is a kind of a thin book. I was initially disappointed at how thin it is, but it's economical, tells the story it needs to tell, and it has quite a clever ending which links everything together. So that's those 3 books: An Odyssey, The Lost, and Three Rings. I enjoyed them all, and Mendelssohn is obviously writers to follow, and I believe he has a couple more books coming out in the next year or so. His own translation of the Odyssey, and another book about how to read classics. So they'll be ones to look for. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll be back with you very soon.